Mr. Rothner.
Thank you. I began my career as a union-side labor lawyer, not under the National Labor Relations Act, but under the California Agricultural Labor Relations Act. I was on the staff of the United Farm Workers Union between 1975 and 1978. My comments this morning concern the question whether this board should remove obstacles to the expeditious conduct of representation elections. And I'd like to describe the experience under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, a statute that includes a maximum period of 7 days between the filing of the petition and the conduct of the election. I'll start by clarifying that I'm not advocating a maximum 7-day period under the National Labor Relations Act. I simply want to describe an example of a speedy approach that worked well in the hope that the board will adopt rules that will remove impediments to the expeditious conduct of elections and adopt standards and guidelines that direct regional directors to hasten the process. Under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, the 7-day provision was necessary in order to ensure that the election take place during a peak employment season, while the migratory workforce remained in the vicinity. And to test that question, that is peak season, the ALRB's regulations require that the employer supply relevant payroll records from past growing seasons within 48 hours from the filing of the petition. While there were no statutorily required pre-election hearings or pre-election hearings of any kind, there were issues, the peak season question being one of them. There were unit exclusion issues, whether agricultural employee issues, whether certain employees who worked in, say, packing sheds and doing field-to-shed trucking were covered under the National Labor Relations Act rather than the Agricultural Labor Relations Act, and geographic community of interest questions having to do with whether non-contiguous growing regions should be of the same employer should be included in the same bargaining unit. In our experience, putting issues such as supervisory inclusions and exclusions and other individual exclusion and exclusion issues off until after the election promoted not only speed but the conservation of resources all around the agencies and the parties. The outcome, of course, sometimes renders these unit inclusion and exclusion issues moot if the union loses the election. And in many cases, if the union wins the election, the parties find a way, often quite easily, to resolve those issues without the need to invoke the board's processes. As for the impact of speed on the opportunity to wage persuasion campaigns, the experience under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act was that there was no shortage of consultants and lawyers to advise employers. And that was true even for the smallest of farms, and commencing with the first citing, not with the filing of petitions, but with the first citing of any union activity in the fields of a particular employer. In fact, there are many firms that grew exponentially in California, law firms and consulting firms, with the adoption of the Agricultural Labor Relations Act. The campaigns were robust all around, including not only activity at the sites, but visits to labor camps, use of radio spots, and many types of paraphernalia on all sides. This was before the day when one could use intranet or internet, or even effectively use video in a campaign. But certainly we have all those advantages today for people who want to get their message out. At bottom, I just don't understand the complaint that there might be insufficient time to campaign. After all, the employer has the workers within its domain every day, including payday, with an enormous advantage in disseminating its message orally, in writing, in a variety of visual and electronic media, in groups, and one-on-one. By the way, under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act in the 70s, the vast majority of employees being organized were immigrants and the vast majority of those employees were monolingual in languages other than English. In fact, in some were illiterate. A significant portion were illiterate in any language. I never heard a complaint from an employee that they needed more than 7 days to figure out what unionization was about or how to vote in an election. In fact, I would argue, anecdotally again, that too long a period between the filing of the petition and the election leads to campaign fatigue on the part of the employees. And I have experienced that under the National Labor Relations Act, particularly in cases where there was a protracted period where people get fed up with both sides receiving far too much information. And in my experience, voter participation tends to fall. We had extraordinarily high levels of participation in those very speedy ALRA elections, much higher levels than in many NLRB elections I've been involved with since, in the many. And the proof regarding participation and opportunities for persuasion is in the pudding. In its first 3 months of operation, the ALRB, this was back in 1975, conducted 329 elections. There were 2 unions involved in many of those elections, certainly not all of them, the United Farm Workers Union and the Teamsters. And victories went to each, as well as to the non-union choice. As for the ability of employers to wage campaigns, during my 3-year tenure with the Farm Workers Union, much to my unhappiness, there were 2 elections involving the largest table grape and tree fruit employer in the industry, Jamara Vineyards Corporation. And both times, the campaigns were hard fought, and the winner was no union. So they certainly had an opportunity in a very large election conducted in a very short amount of time to get their message out. In sum, the experience under the Agricultural Labor Relations Act demonstrates that it's possible to speed up the process. I've seen the past, and it works. I'd also like to end. I don't think this is a very complicated undertaking that you're engaged in, with all due respect, and I'd like to make that point.
You're out of time, so if you can wrap it up.
It'll be really quick.
Okay, sure.
In 1966, one of the earliest strikes was going on in the table grape industry, and the Senate, the United States Senate, decided to hold subcommittee hearings on whether to amend the National Labor Relations Act to include agricultural employees as a means to provide a vote to the workers on strike. Only one employer came forward to testify at those subcommittee meetings held in Delano, California. His name was Martin Zaninovich. And Senator Robert Kennedy asked him, his point was that there's no strike, it's a myth, our workers don't want a union. Senator Robert Kennedy asked Mr. Zaninovich if he would honor an election if his employees chose to be unionized. And he said, Mr. Zaninovich, that he would, if an acceptable set of rules could be established. Senator Kennedy responded as follows: we have the ability to get to the moon. So I think we can establish machinery so people can vote. I think you can do this. I think it's not that difficult, and I wish you well.
Thank you.